Good evening. Welcome to a new year of debate and discussion on Q&A. I'm Tony Jones. Joining us tonight, breakaway Palmer United Senator Jacqui Lambie, the Minister for Agriculture and Deputy Leader of the National Party, Barnaby Joyce, Queensland MP and former Treasurer Wayne Swan, Queensland Greens Senator Larissa Waters, and former DLP Senator turned Independent John Madigan. Please welcome our panel. Thank you, and you can join the Twitter conversation with the Quanda hashtag. We're very keen to use your live questions tonight, so if you've got a question, add @Quanda to help us find it. Facebook followers want us to discuss the Queensland election, Tony Abbott's leadership, and whether Rupert Murdoch has too much influence. Well, our first question tonight comes from Steve Curtis.
Thanks, Tony. Barnaby, my question is this. Did you consult your wife before staking the family home on your claim that Tony Abbott would lead the coalition into the next election?
Barnaby.
Apparently not. No, obviously Lee asked me a question about whether we were going to talk about Prince Philip at the election. I said I'll put my house on it that we won't. She then doubled the bet, and of course I'll be having a conversation with Lee later on in about 1.5 years' time, I imagine.
Been a lot of speculation as to whether that was a genuine bet or just a rhetorical flourish. Do you want to put your house on the line right now?
I think all these things, as you would know, are rhetorical flourishes. But it's what I do have is, look, I know it's a tough time at the moment, okay? And how you judge a person in these periods of times is how they deal with them. It's like anything in life, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a sporting game, whether it's anything, you get to a point where it appears the chips are against you, and that's how you judge the character of those around you. And they're either up to it and you stick as a group, or it falls to pieces and goes into chaos. Now, I believe that Tony, I've spoken to Tony, I've spoken to Joe, I've spoken to my colleagues, spoken to Warren. We have a strong belief that we have a purpose. We've got to try and turn the nation around, and we've just got to deal with this and get through it.
Do you feel like upping the ante after today's press club performance by the Prime Minister?
I think it was a solid performance. I think...
solid?
Yeah. I mean,
it's damned with faint praise, isn't it?
No, I never what do you expect? You hardly expect the Gettysburg Address. You expect... You expect...
With a Prime Minister's life on the line, you might expect something pretty special.
No, I think that it's just re-announcing the core message. You can't go off your core message. That is, if we don't get the finances right, we go out the back door. We understand that people on certain issues are unhappy, but we've just got to get this through. This is as an accountant speaking. We've just got to get this business through. Otherwise, what we leave in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time, it's just not fair for our children, for the people around us, because we borrow from their bank. We borrow from the bank of our children and leave them with a massive overdraft. Now, we've got to try and make sure that doesn't happen. It's going to be tough days, but we're going to have to get through it.
Jacqui Lambie, would you put money on Tony Abbott being there at the next election as Prime Minister?
No, I've said all the way along, he won't make it. He won't make it to the end. I'll be lucky if he makes it to the end of the week. That's the first thing. And if these blokes had any common sense and want to move forward and get on with it and have half a chance of winning the next election, they'll be getting rid of him immediately. Other than that, I imagine Bill Shorten sitting there going, yippee, yippee, leave him there, leave him there. You know?
That did seem to be the tenor of his interview on the weekend.
Oh, I would imagine it would have been. He'd be sitting there
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because we've got a follow-up Twitter questions from @Jonah Logue. Can the panel give us their bets as to when Abbott gets the boot? Wayne Swan.
Look, I think probably prior to the budget. If he doesn't go prior to the budget, he'll be there for a bit longer. But it's a terrible time for there to be such disunity. I think really the tragedy of the Prime Minister's address today is he couldn't suppress in everything he said his deep conviction that he'd done nothing wrong. So it was very much business as usual. And the fact is, and Barnaby was on it just before, all of this scare campaign about deficit and debt is just so damaging to our country. It's so damaging to confidence, business confidence, consumer confidence is low. It's having an impact on the economy, not just on the government. So I think the sooner this is over, the better. I've seen a leadership challenge or two. And
been at the heart of one or two.
and I think changing leaders.
They worked very well for you, didn't they?
Sure. Changing leaders is really risky. I didn't support, for example, the first challenge in our party, but here it won't make any difference. If Tony Abbott goes and Julie Bishop or Malcolm Turnbull turns up, it's going to be the same horse, just a different jockey, because it's the same program. There's so much talk that the problem here is salesmanship. It's the substance of what the government is doing. It's the brutal austerity program.
More time for that later,
Sure.
no doubt. Larissa Waters, the question from Twitter was, would you put a bet on Tony Abbott being there at the next election? Or, in fact, the bet was how soon he would get the boot.
Oh, look, I think he'll be getting the boot imminently. What was concerning, I thought, today was there was an awful lot of slogans and not a lot of substance. But what really stuck with me was his constant reference to intergenerational theft from future generations. And he wasn't talking about climate change. He was talking about this confected debt and deficit, which is his code for simply cutting people who can least afford to pay and letting the big end of town get off scot-free. So that really said to me the man is completely out of touch with the science and out of touch with the vast majority of Australians who actually want us to look after this planet and know that we have the skills and the nous to do so.
John Madigan.
Well, Tony, first thing is I'm not a betting person. The second thing is that I don't know anybody in this world who hasn't made a mistake. If you've never done anything, you've never made a mistake. I think that, speculating on whether the Prime Minister survives till the next election is irrelevant, really, to the issues facing our country. Young people need hope. People need jobs, they need a sense of self-worth, they need gainful employment. It's quite frankly, look, the people I speak to say the whole thing is just self-indulgent and a waste of time.
OK, let's move on to our next question. It's from Andrew Russell.
Thanks, Tony. One of the main problems with removing Kevin Rudd was that he was very well liked by the public and his replacement was not liked and very divisive. Tony Abbott is not liked and very divisive. Would there be any problems removing him, replacing him with someone more popular?
Barnaby, Joyce.
I can see I'm getting a lot of questions tonight. I just think that you can't start looking chaotic, and I believe this. I use the metaphor of a boat rowing down the river. You can't just halfway to say, oh, we're all going to change positions, because it doesn't matter what your reasons are. The people from the shorelines just say, that looks like absolute chaos. And it didn't work for the Labor Party. It was, once they had done it, I capitalised on it, because I said, look at them, they can't run their own show. It looks like chaos, and it was chaos. And what we had is, when that chaos manifests itself, it becomes chaotic in everything they do. All their programs become chaotic. Everything starts falling to pieces, and the result is in your overdraft, which is the debt we picked up. So I firmly believe that you've got to try and have this character that's substantial enough to say, these are tough times. The purpose of this, and the reason for this is we're trying to turn the nation around. The purpose for this is for the betterment of the people. The cowardly way is to say, oh, we'll just slink away and try and duck the issue. The courageous thing and what the nation asks of you is say, no, whatever the consequences are, you've got to stick to your guns. You've got to fix this problem up.
What is it that Tony Abbott actually needs to do, in your opinion, to change public perceptions about his leadership?
Well, I agree that there were certain issues that were distracting, and the knighthood for Prince Philip was certainly one of those. That is unanimous. We don't have to worry about revisiting that. It's understood. So we've got to make sure that we keep a clear focus on the big issues. For instance, in his speech today, he talked about something that's very important for my constituents, and I imagine Jacqui's, and I imagine John's, and that is Foreign Investment Review Board guidelines. The Australian people want to know more about who owns what and where and why. The first thing that Penny Wong has come out and, as a response to that speech, and says, no, she won't do it. She's got no interest in telling the Australian people who owns what and where. She wants to keep the guidelines exactly as they are. There are so many people in regional Australia who say, no, I want to know more about my nation and who owns my nation's farmland. I don't think I've got a clear enough picture at this present time. So what we'll see there is more and more of a real debate about real issues. Now, it's also incumbent upon the Labor Party.
So the debate until now has not been about real issues?
I think it's been more about...
Or has the Prime Minister failed to articulate those issues?
No, I think that always at the start of a political term, there's an advantage for the opposition just to throw rocks. That's their right, and I'd do exactly the same thing. But now we're in the second half where it is incumbent upon the Fourth Estate and other people to say, if you truly believe you and the Labor Party are an alternate government, you must start coming up with concrete alternate policies on how you're going to run the nation. Otherwise, you're taking us all for fools.
OK, well, I'll go to Wayne Swan. And if you could go to the question was whether there'd be any negatives at all in removing Tony Abbott as Prime Minister and replacing him with someone, I think you said, who is well liked.
Well, I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference in the long run because it's the program, as it was in Queensland, this brutal austerity which is producing greater inequality, the attempt to essentially destroy Medicare, the $100,000 university degrees, the attack on the social safety net. What these are all about is essentially redistributing wealth to corporations and very powerful vested interests and tipping the balance of power in our economy and our society away from working people. If you look at the budget, it hits working people hard and it continues to eat away at the very foundations of social mobility in our country. So in the long run, I don't think it makes any difference. Might they get a boost for 6 months or 9 months? They stick with this program like they stuck with the program in Queensland, and the Liberal Prime Minister will be out the door because this program is simply unacceptable to hard-working Australians.
Jacqui Lambie, I'll bring you back in a second, Barnaby. Jacqui Lambie, the questioner asks, are there any negatives from removing Tony Abbott as Prime Minister and replacing him with someone more popular from your perspective?
Oh, well, you know what?
In the Senate, on the crossbench, what do you say?
It's not about popularity. It's about doing, finding some balance. And you've got the Liberal Party, which is so far right, and then you've got the Labor, which is so far left, and then you've got the crossbenchers in the middle, which I can tell you what are dealing with a great deal in between there, trying to keep it mediated in the middle there. But there's a lot of things he can change, and we've put our ideas across. His, $5 billion worth of bribes to sell off assets. He can cut that out. He's still got $25 billion in the forward estimates for foreign aid. Well, I simply believe we look after our own backyard first. The kids out there work for the dole. It's failed before in the past. It will fail again, but he's not even listening to the National Service Trade and Traineeship Scheme that I've put across to them. So they're not listening to the crossbenchers, and I doubt very much if they're listening to the Labor Party, and that's half their problem. They're not prepared to communicate. This is where they've failed. I think it is time they change leadership. Tony Abbott has failed. He cannot stand up today and admit he has failed. And it takes a big man to admit that, yep, he's got it wrong and he's failed. Until Tony Abbott does that, cleaning up this mess is never going to happen.
All right, we've got another question. I'll bring you back in, Barnaby. We've got another question on similar lines, but addresses some of those issues from Joan Hughes.
Thank you, Tony. This is a question to all the panellists. Very, very recently, Malcolm Turnbull said that leadership is about effectively communicating with the public. I want to know from all the panellists how Tony Abbott and all of you, as politicians, can engage more effectively with the community and convince the electorate that your messages are the right messages.
Barnaby, Joyce, I'll start with you.
Well, it's on many levels, and it's a good question. I suppose the first one is go do the shopping. Pick up the shopping trolley and start pushing it around the supermarket, and you'll be surprised how many people come up to you. Make sure that you just walk up and down the street and allow yourself the capacity for people to come up and ventilate what they feel are their concerns. Make sure that they use this the metaphor of go to the pub, but that is basically put yourself in any public place where people have the capacity to one-on-one come up and talk to you. Then test those views against what you see in the wider media. Don't rely too much on social media because it all gets corralled in sort of silos of venom or love, but try and make sure that as much as possible you engage. I was even at Parliament, my door's always open. If people want to walk in, there's never a member of Parliament that walks into my door, no matter what their colour or creed, who doesn't get access to me if they want to see me. But amongst all that, the rest is in the lap of the gods.
You're not
you try
suggesting
this.
that Tony Abbott should spend more time in shopping centres and pubs?
No, it can't.
Why not? Why shouldn't he?
Because it has to come with a security detail. That's what, any person, once you get to that level...
Plus the entire press gallery and all their cameras.
Yeah, and it turns into a circus. But for me...
But you're talking about ordinary MPs. How does a Prime Minister like Tony Abbott hone or re-hone his ability to communicate with the public if that's failing?
Well, you've got to be... You have a cabinet, like any person, you have a cabinet, and you have in that cabinet a very honest discussion about what is going on. And as long as that cabinet remains honest and frank, where people, and as long as you can, trust the sort of the sanctity of the secrecy of the cabinet, then you can say what you like, as affronting as that comment may be. And believe you me, in cabinet there is no wallflowers. People will come out and say things exactly as they are.
Jacqui, I did interrupt you there. You can jump in.
You know what? Security can not be seen or heard. They can move away from you. You can walk around shows. You can walk around events that are going on. I spend 40% of my time out there in my car. We have these wonderful IT systems these days that allow us to do that. We put the laptops in the back. I have my boots on, my Levi jeans on, and off I go around Tasmania, because it's the Tasmanians that tell me what needs to be done in Tasmania. That's where my solutions to the problems come from, and I'm very grateful for that. Until these politicians start getting back to the grassroots, we're still going to come up with the stupid solutions that we're coming up with now. You have to get out there with the real people, and you have to listen to what they're saying.
John Madigan, I'll bring you in. Is that what Malcolm Turnbull's speech was about effective leadership, really taking the country along with you. How do you see effective communication coming from the top? You can reflect on your own position, as Jacqui has done if you wish. But
in relation to your question, Joan, I believe it's a privilege to be a Member of Parliament, and when people share their concerns with you. Now, whether I agree with people or not, I value the fact that people come and they want to express their opinion and their concerns. And I think that, at the end of the day, we here on the panel are public servants. We're not public masters. And we owe the public our attention. We owe the public respect of their opinions, their desires, their hopes and their dreams. My suggestion to the Prime Minister would be to engage with the public, to listen to the public, and to my colleagues to remember that we hold a position of great privilege. Ultimately, we are custodians of Australia for a very short period of time in the overall framework of things, and then if we don't hand it on any better, we certainly shouldn't hand it on any worse.
Well, naturally, we support those comments and would like the Prime Minister to come and engage with the public on this program. But Larissa Ward, is your view?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joan. I think the key question about effective communication, there's two things really. Firstly, it's actually about listening rather than just one way. But secondly, I think you need to keep trust with the public and just don't lie. It's not that hard. Just be honest with people. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of listening going on, and there's certainly been a lot of broken promises which have disappointed a lot of people. In terms of listening, though, what I'm particularly concerned about is the government seems to have a complete tin ear to science and expert evidence. And we're seeing policies that are made that perhaps seem populist, but actually can be really damaging in the long run. And climate change is the biggest one. We didn't have a science minister for the first, year of this government. They've now buckled and added it to someone's portfolio, but it's hardly a standalone ministry. And I think it really just signifies that they've stopped listening. And the knighthood, and I will hearken to it because it was just so bizarre, was a perfect illustration of that. If the Prime Minister had have been talking to any normal person, somebody would have said, just don't go there, mate, it's weird. It's not Australian. So, thank you.
We might come back to that issue later. So you're watching Q&A. Last weekend's Queensland election took the commentators by surprise. Our next question comes from Nick Rippon.
Labor's Queensland election victory was a resounding rejection of public sector job cuts, asset sales and widespread austerity. Considering this is the same approach to government of Tony Abbott, How will the Queensland election result shake things up in Canberra?
We'll start with the Queenslanders, and Wayne Swan, we haven't heard from you for a while.
Well, I think it sends a really powerful message to Canberra, but I think more generally to all of the vested interest groups that are pushing this austerity-driven agenda, which is not a smart economic agenda. It's not an agenda for growth. It's actually an agenda which favours a few selected vested interests in the community and doesn't spread the benefits of growth more generally. And that was the power of what happened in Queensland. It wasn't just a vote, it was an earthquake. I've been around Queensland politics for a while, and that's the swing the other night, given it was a first-term government with the biggest majority in Australian history and was removed within 3 years, means that this is not some sort of glib volatility which people use to describe it. It's nothing of the sort. It is the pent-up frustration of hundreds of thousands of Queenslanders who've seen their health system ripped apart. And particularly in my electorate, there was a question before, how do you get around? Well, we live in a community, not a corporation, and MPs, and I'm sure MPs from all sides of politics do this to varying degrees, have to be out there with people in their communities. And you only had to go around any community in Queensland, from where I live in the northern suburbs to Bundaberg, where there was a 20% swing, all the way up the coast, to hear people talking about their opposition to the asset sales, what had happened at the local hospital. So I think this is a really powerful message against this economic orthodoxy that the Liberals, state and federal, are trying to ram down our throat.
Well, I mean, you tried on the weekend to link up Campbell Newman and
sure.
Tony Abbott as kind of philosophical partners.
And too right they are.
Well, I mean, in what way?
Well, it's the same playbook. Campbell Newman came to power. He said he was going to govern as a moderate and then behaved as an extremist. He then, out of the blue, appointed an audit commission, brought in Peta Costello, came in, made a whole lot of weird and unsubstantiated claims about levels of debt, used that level of debt to run a scare campaign to try and justify an agenda he didn't take to the people at the election and get the electorate to accept it. And they wouldn't wear it. And this is exactly what has actually happened in the federal arena as well. And that's what we're seeing the backlash about. We're seeing the backlash about the fact that people not only think promises were broken, but these were so cynical and so brazen, they know they didn't even mean them when they were originally made. Because if you had the critique of our government that they have, that everything was so bad, why would they have made those commitments in the first place? So this is what is coming back to haunt the Liberal Party, state and federal.
OK, well, I'll go to Barnaby, Joyce, to respond to that. And you're a former Queenslander, so did you see it coming, even remotely?
Yeah, no, Tony, I knew it was going to be tough. I honestly didn't think we're going to lose. I thought that Campbell would have a tough run. The reality is right now that nobody has won. It's a hung parliament. Pauline Hanson, Shane Knuth, Robbie Katter and Peter Wellington will decide who the government is going to be. And that's so no one can say it's a win. And if you're saying, well, the vote affected why Pauline Hanson got elected or why Shane Knuth got elected, I think that's a long ball. But what I do think, Nick, is this. You can't always talk about how you're going to spend money unless you're going to have an honest conversation, because we're talking about honesty here, about how you're going to get it, where it's going to come from. Now, Wayne Swan, when he was Treasurer, 6 times he gave us promises of a surplus and 6 times he was wrong. And that's like the profit for the government for the year. It just never happened. And we just kept going out the back door. Now, if we're going to be honest about this, if we're going to say we can't have any form of cuts which gets emphasised by Wayne as austerity, call it what you want. If you don't want that, then you must, if you're going to talk about, we're all going to be honest now, you must have an honest conversation about where the money comes from.
Okay,
because
Barnaby,
we have a massive
I'm just going to interrupt you. The questioner has his...
back.
I'm sorry to do that. The questioner has his hand up. I'll go back to the questioner.
Barnaby, you like to talk about debt and deficit, but at the end of the day, you always ignore the global financial crisis. Tony Abbott didn't mention it once today in his speech.
Well, sure, but it was their treasurer, it was the Labor Party treasurer who said we're going to have a surplus. We never got one. And when we ended up with $300,000 million on the credit card, I think that is a rather substantial thing that we have to try and deal with. When you talk about the global financial crisis, the reason, and you're referring to a stimulus package, the reason Australia got through was not because of a stimulus package. Iron ore prices were at a record level. Coal prices were at a record level. It was on the back of little red rocks and little black rocks that we got through the financial crisis, not on $900 cheques and not on ceiling insulation and not on a whole heap of other dopey ideas which just made the problem worse.
OK, I was going to...
That is just a classic example.
Right, you can respond briefly.
It's a classic example of why the government isn't believed. The mining boom wasn't there at the end of 2009 and all the way through 2010. China itself was heading for zero growth at this stage. The mining boom came along later. We performed just about the best of any developed economy in the world because our government had the courage to support our people. And people saw that in the community. We kept people in small businesses in jobs and we supported people from hitting the unemployment queues where they would have been for years. We avoided all the capital destruction and all of the debt that would have come with it if we hadn't acted.
OK, we'll come back to a broader economic discussion in a moment. We're talking about the Queensland... Someone with the hand up there, I'll come to you in a moment. We're talking about the Queensland election. We've got a young Queenslander who's come down to ask a question. His name is Toby Loftus. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. In 2009, Anna Bligh said she wouldn't sell Queensland assets. In 2012, Campbell Newman said he wouldn't sell Queensland's assets. In 2015, with a victory likely, Anastasia Palaszczuk has said she won't sell Queensland's assets. Can we trust Anastasia Palaszczuk?
OK, I'm going to go to Larissa first, the other Queenslander on the panel.
Thanks for your question, Toby. I think with such a resounding walloping of the Newman and LNP government in Queensland, it would be a brave person to once again try to privatise our public assets. Queenslanders have shown time and time again, as you point out, that we actually want them kept in public hands, and the Greens have always had that position. And we've been resolute in that regard. I think really this was a resounding rejection of the sorts of policies that we've seen from Newman, and we saw so much in such a brief time. Attacks on civil liberties, massive war on the environment and all of the protections that we used to have on our law books, mass sackings of public servants, but it was privatisation as well as all of those things that led to such a strong result. What excited me was that when I was out door knocking with a range of our candidates, people kept raising dredging and dumping on the Great Barrier Reef, which is something that I'm really passionate about, and I was thrilled that people in the community had that really high on their list of issues. So I think privatisation, protection of the reef, and just the rabid attacks that the Newman government had wreaked on Queensland has what sent them packing.
Barnaby, we're getting a lot of tweets coming in on the issue of privatisation, and of course this is one of Joe Hockey's big initiatives, is to encourage the states to sell assets. And we were talking earlier about the lessons from the Queensland election debacle for the LNP. Is that one of them, that you're going to have to rethink that?
Well, I think it's, using honesty once more, it was the privatisation of assets, or the lease, was not accepted by the Queensland people, and that should have been recognised. But that puts you back into another dilemma. So if you can't get the money from there, if people want a new port, or they want a new railway line, or they want this, want that, want hospitals, then you've got to say, OK, if you don't want to do that, and we're all going to be honest, where's the money going to come from? And you can't say, well, we'll just borrow more, because, you know, this paying, you know, $1 billion, $1,000 million worth of interest a month, that's insanity.
But are you saying...
We don't have the money,
Barnaby,
so we have to borrow it.
Yeah, Barnaby, are you saying that the asset sales push from the Treasurer is a mistake?
Well, in the Queensland form of the election, it is without a shadow of a doubt, it was a major concern.
But it's a national program your government's got to encourage the sale of assets. So the question is that a mistake?
If people don't want that, then you've got to have an honest discussion. You've got to say, OK, we've really got to now go back to all the ways you want to spend money and start saying, well, we can't spend that, we can't spend that. And therefore, the issue where Mr. Swan talks about austerity just becomes accentuated. You can't live in a vacuum or live like a child. If you can't say, I don't want to do anything to bring in money, but I have a whole range of reasons I want to spend it, then that's just unsustainable.
Once again, we'll come to that issue because we've got a question on the tax summit that's coming, but our questioner Toby wants to get back in. Go ahead.
Well, Barnaby, Campbell Newman I read an article a while ago that he was paid more than President Obama. If you want to save money, can't he take a pay cut?
OK, that's not going to fix the deficit. We know that. But let me just quickly bring you back. I just want to confirm what you've said here. Are you saying that the lesson you're taking out of the Queensland election result is that the asset sales program is a problem for you politically.
It's without a shadow of a doubt it was a concern in Queensland.
What about nationally?
Well, it's how you sell the message, how you convince the Australian people, just like we're doing now, where you say, if you want that new road, if you want that new port, if you want to build the inland rail, if you want to build these assets, we've got to have the discussion about where on earth does the money come from. Because apparently, just think of it in your own finances. We're not going to sell anything. We've just got this massive debt, on this massive debt trajectory, and we don't want to cut services. This is the dilemma that Joe Hockey has. And he's saying to you, look, if you want these wishes delivered, then we've got to be adults and work out where on earth the money comes from.
Jacqui Lambie, do you accept that?
You know what? Howard sold $59 billion worth of assets last time he was around, Barnaby. What's Australia got left to sell? Its soul? Fair go. Now, you're going to have to get a little bit bigger than that. There's nothing left to sell, Barnaby. You can only sell the farm gate once.
Well, and even...
So, you know what? Let's have a look at a financial transactions tax. Let's go after the big boys. Your end of town, Barnaby. Let's have a look at it. Financial transactions tax.
I'm the one trying to push for greater transparency on the Foreign Investment Review Board. It's the Labor Party today who says they don't want it. It's their Labor Party today who says they don't want it.
I think you'd be fine. Everyone have a good look at Labor would, certainly with the financial transactions tax. Francis,
Would you?
Francis,
Would you?
Would you look at a financial transactions tax?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
There you go.
Because they've already given
what's your solution?
Well, the $28 billion worth of revenue that Barnaby and the government gave away in their first mid-year statement, when they got rid of the resources rent tax, when they gave away the measures that we've put in place to make multinationals pay their tax because they've been evading it. They're the sort of measures that these guys talk about the deficit blowing out, and they're giving away revenue all the time.
Let's talk about that
to the top end of town.
Because this is a classic statement of how completely inept your policy was.
$3 billion you gave away, Barnaby. $3 billion.
You had this multiple billion-dollar revenue stream and just never eventuated. Not only did you do that, you had this promise of money, which you went out and spent, and the money never turned up. And who did you get to write your mineral resource?
Okay, all right, I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you all.
$59 billion worth of debt was to pay off your debt, Labor's debt, the last time around. So come on.
Jacqui, just listen for a minute. We've got a question that's going to take us to some of these issues in more depth. I'm going to take it now. It's from Terry Fagan.
Thank you, Tony. For a long time, the Australian public have had a highly valued low public debt and balanced budgets. Now, recent electoral results have indicated that governments who make unpopular decisions or painful decisions are unlikely to get re-elected. Given the fact that Australia has a demographic issue coming forwards and that our economic circumstances are declining with change in balance of trade and particularly things like the iron ore costs, that we are going to have to make difficult decisions in the future. How does a government manage public intolerance of such hard economic decisions?
I'm going to start with John Madigan on this. It really gets down to the question that's been debated here. How do you pay for the policies that you want to sustain or build in a country when you've got huge deficits as far as the eye can see? Do we have to make tough decisions? What government's prepared to do it with the electoral cycle that we have?
Thanks for your question, Tony. Look, points that both Wayne and Barnaby and Jacqui have made, they've all got, points, and I acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, you can't spend what you haven't got. And anybody who's worked for themselves or been in small business or is battling to, pay the costs of everyday living well and truly knows that. We've got a situation where, we've become a nation that simply thinks digging holes in the ground and turning our kids into a nation of drink waiters and educating our competitors how to bury us. We've got to get back to value adding. Australia is blessed with nearly every mineral known to man, the vast majority of them. And we simply got to get out of this mindset of building up everybody else at the expense of Australians.
Larissa Waters.
Look, thanks for your question, Terry, and it's a really pertinent one. Where do we get the money from? Well, for a start, let's stop giving away the free money to the big multinational mining companies in billions and billions of subsidies every year that they don't need, and that is not government's role to subsidise.
The question was actually, if I can just go back to the question, it was really about how governments make hard decisions. When they get blocked in the Senate, they've got obstructionism in the Senate, it's very hard to actually have an agenda where you bring the budget back into surplus when you can't we can't sell your idea to the public and you can't sell it to the Senate.
Well, maybe think of some new ideas, and we've been proposing them for a while, including stopping fossil fuel subsidies, bringing back the carbon price, which not only will help us address climate change, but was a huge money spinner. Again, let's look to people who actually have the means to pay. Instead, and unlike what Barnaby said about, oh, you can't cut services, well, unfortunately, they really have cut services, and they're looking now at more cuts on the most vulnerable in our community, the single parents, people who are seeking a job, community organisations, undermining the fabric of what makes us Australia and what makes us a functional society. So let's look at those who can afford to pay. Let's particularly look at those fossil fuel subsidies, which are just totally unnecessary in this day and age. And let's have some revenue proposals. Today, the Prime Minister was all about, oh, we've got to cut spending. What about raising some revenue? Why is it always just a myopic focus on one side of the ledger?
This is, once more, so what the Greens propose, this is correct, you don't believe in coal mining. Is that correct?
We don't support new coal mines. That is absolutely the case.
Coal is our
and the rest of the world isn't kind of keen on them anymore either.
Biggest export. Coal is our nation's biggest export. So when you think of it in your house, your biggest earner in your household, they want to stop. And then they say, but we can't count services either. Now, can't you see that that is just, it's just fantasia. It's just rubbish. I mean, if you don't like coal mining, that's fair enough. But you've got to say, and this is where the money will come from if we don't do that. If you don't do that, it's just childish.
Barnaby, the coal price is tanking. The rest of the world wants our clean
energy. Then that itself will shut down the coal.
I don't want our dirty energy anymore.
You can't come up with this idea. You can't keep on saying, well, we'll never earn any money from that because we don't like that. And it's a fair enough statement, but we've got absolutely no idea where the money's going to come from. And somehow, miraculously, we'll keep the hospitals open, keep the doctors paid for, we'll keep a defence force and keep money going to the states to pay for the police force. It'll just happen by a miracle.
Barnaby, Joyce, isn't one of the main problems that you have in selling your budget, for example, the way you went around doing it? Isn't the biggest burden of budget measures on the poorest people? Is equity the big issue here? And can you address that now? Is it too late?
Well, I'm very aware, especially coming from regional areas, because that's where the poorest end up, especially in the small regional towns. I'm completely focused on that and making sure that as a nation we do what we can to get the infrastructure into those areas to try and give them the opportunities that we just take for granted here tonight. Within these tough times, we have to find the money to create the seedbed, whether that's inland rail, whether that's dams, whether it's the things that actually create wealth, that is a sustainable, renewable creation of wealth. And we have to do that within the very confined financial means.
But just going back to my question, though, is the equity contained within the budget measures one of the problems you now have to address?
We're in all these things, from looking at small business and how we reinvigorate that. The best thing that we can do for any person is to make sure that we create the infrastructure seedbed so that they have a job and they're not reliant as much on the government. Yes, we have to keep supporting those who fall on hard times and have fallen outside. There has to be a social safety net. We must always support that. But the biggest thing we've got to concentrate on is to make sure that we have an economy, that we have jobs, and we are creating the jobs. We've got to keep this program going because we're only, this is 1.5 years since we started.
Okay, I know Wayne Swan wants to get in on this. I'm just going to interrupt you just for a moment so we can go to a question which will bring some of those ideas back to the fore, and it's from Katie Robinson.
Thanks, Tony. My question's to the panel, largely the government. It is acknowledged structural reform is necessary to pay for ongoing future services in Australia. So why is the government not looking at a more equitable and broad set of reforms, including taxation, superannuation, negative gearing, rather than simply targeting those social sectors such as higher education, health, that impact low-income Australians and widen the social gaps?
Okay, I'm going to go to Wayne Swan first on this, and I'll come back to the government and our other senators.
Well, firstly, I'm an optimist about the Australian economy. We've got a AAA credit rating for very good reasons. And one of the reasons that we've grown so fast over the last 30 years and delivered some of the highest social mobility in the developed world over the last 30 years is that when we made big structural changes, we made them fairly. And many may recall when we put Medicare in place, it was a fight with the Conservatives that went on for decades, but we got it in there. And part of that was a trade-off with the workforce. We made our workplaces more competitive by putting in place a decent minimum wage and enterprise bargaining. We put in place a superannuation system that funds our economy. Our superannuation system is now bigger than the whole Australian economy. All of these big structural reforms also involve pain, and they involved vigorous public debate. But what we put with them was a set of policies where everybody could see that when the benefits of growth came, there was something else there for them. So what are they in Australia? They are Medicare, one of the best health systems in the world. There is our system of tertiary education, which is affordable without having $100,000 degrees. Structural reform has to happen. I absolutely know that the ageing of our population brings challenges. But there's probably no country in the world that is in a better place than Australia to deal with these challenges. And we don't have a spending problem in our budget.
That's Wayne Swan, the reforms you're talking about took place in the Hawke-Keating governments. In your own government, you brought some very big spending plans, but you never explained how you were going to pay for them. And that's one of the problems that the questioner is addressing here, and everyone's addressing here, including Barnaby, is where's the money going to come from to pay for these big programs?
The two big structural reforms that we put forward, which are recommended by all the international organisations, the IMF, the World Bank, most market economists, the two big structural reforms are resource rent taxation and of course, a whole range of other changes, the most fundamental being carbon pricing. Because you can't be a first world economy in the 21st century unless you do something about clean energy. So that was driving a revolution when it came to renewable energy. But who opposed those two big, hard, really politically difficult structural reforms? The Liberal Party. And that's one of the reasons why Australia now has a problem. If we're going to drive structural reforms, and we do need to, particularly on the revenue side of our budget, because our tax system is leaking, there are huge holes in it, and they are mainly benefiting the top end of town, that has to be fixed. And of course, when we do that, and when we grow strongly, we will be in better nick than just about any other developed economy in the world. But at the moment, it's all ground to a halt because of the unfairness of the government.
Are you suggesting that the carbon tax was actually a revenue-raising measure designed to pay for big programs outside of the environment?
Not at all.
So how do you pay for the big programs that you brought into play?
That was a big, tough program that impacted on the cost of living, so we used half the revenue to compensate people on low incomes. That is how you drive a structural reform. We didn't pretend it was going to be easy. We knew we'd lose a lot of political blood over it, and we did. It probably cost us government. But sooner or later, a government will be back in this country doing some form of carbon pricing because it's absolutely the right thing for us to grow in the 21st century.
I'll bring Barnaby back in a minute and the other senators. We have a question from the floor. A man with his hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. $20 billion from coal that's been sitting in the ground for millions of years. It'd be the most natural thing on the planet. We've had lies about sea level rise. It's just an impossibility for ice to melt and the surrounding water to rise. There is a survey point at
OK, I'm just going to ask you to quickly come to a question because you've gone off the topic that we were talking about, but I understand that is related to the carbon tax, so quickly come to your question.
Well, we want the truth. That's what we want, and before the next election from the Greens, that's what we want.
OK, Barnaby, Joyce, I'm going to bring you back in on the broader question that was asked before. You haven't had a chance to address this. The revenue-raising measures. You've said yourself You need to raise revenue. You might even have to get rid of the asset sale program if what you're saying about the political consequences of it is correct. So where's the money going to come from?
We're in continual review of how the Tax Act works. What I might say is some of the savings measures that we've put up that were proposed by the Australian Labor Party have blocked in the Senate, just because this is a form of destruction, of just, let's destroy the place, let's, make things complete and utter chaos. You would think a responsible opposition would support at least their measures, which they acknowledge they have to do. On the carbon tax, the problem with the carbon tax is it hurt the poorest. The people, because the biggest issue I see in my discussions is the cost of living, and predominantly driven overwhelmingly by the price of power. People want a cheaper price of power. And when I'm walking up and down the street, and maybe I walk up and down different streets to Senator Waters, people say, get the price of power down. Well, it's true. I mean, when people have very meagre incomes, that power bill scares them to death because they're trying to work out how they're going to pay. And so you've all the things you do. It's power, it's fuel, it's food, it's making sure those fundamentals turn up at an affordable price. And
Okay,
that's what
Barnaby, that is, to be, with respect, that is an old argument being refought. What I'm asking you is what new revenue-raising measures are you going to countenance in your tax review? Are you thinking about negative gearing, winding that back? Are you thinking about taxing high earners with very large superannuation subsidies?
Well,
are you thinking about those sort of things? Because today the Prime Minister ruled out the GST because he said the Labor states won't have it, so therefore he won't fight for it.
Well, I'd love to have a live across to Joe Hockey and see his blood pressure go up as I start suggesting possible tax changes, but I'm not going to do it. I mean, really, that is a role for Joe and a role for Matthias, and I'll be part of that conversation. But we are not blind to the fact the fundamental equation remains the same. We've got to somehow find money, or we've got to somehow stop spending money. There is no magic in this. Any one of you could understand that.
Well, one day we might find out what those measures are, but not right
Joe,
now.
I'm sure if you get Joe on the
All right,
program.
it's time to move along. The political year is off and running. You're watching Q&A. Our next question comes from Hannah Turnbull.
Thanks, Tony. Barnaby, my question's for you. What strategies are being implemented by Cabinet to ensure that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, one of the few female figures visible amongst coalition ranks, does not become a scapegoat for the government's poor and unpopular decisions?
Sure. Well, I can't tell you the tactics of Cabinet. Generally, you'll find them in the paper. Look, Peta Credlin is an extremely capable lady. I don't think that there's any discussion whatsoever that you start removing extremely capable people.
Well, I'm sorry to say that Rupert Murdoch would beg to differ. I mean, his Twitter account suggests that is someone the Prime Minister with problems at the top should jettison. Now, I'm just wondering, what did you think of his intervention, just to start with? Do you think there's no public discussion about this?
I would go the other half to insanity if I started taking my Twitter account seriously.
Or Rupert Murdoch? We are talking about Rupert Murdoch's Twitter account, not yours.
Good luck to him. Good luck to him. God bless him. But Rupert has a right to express his views like anybody else on Twitter. And,
well, I'm sorry, but can I just interrupt? The Murdoch idea gets parroted by News Limited journalists right across the country, and we see some of the most prominent News Limited journalists now suggesting that Peta Credlin should bite the bullet and go, or that Tony Abbott should sack her.
Sure. Well, Tony, this just dispels the myth where everyone said, oh, well, News Limited is just a cheerleader for the coalition. No, News Limited, good luck to them, is a cheerleader for News Limited. And whoever's in government, they'll be ardent and focused on how they operate. Sometimes you agree with them, sometimes you don't. In this case, I don't agree with them.
Jacqui Lambie.
Well, first off, it's about time Murdoch stayed the hell out of politics in Australia. That's the first thing he can do. Secondly, you know what?
He does own
the
some
problem
of the
is, I don't care what he owns. He can stay out of it. Couldn't give a damn. Well, first of all, Murdoch's another one, not big enough. He went out there, backed Tony Abbott, and Tony Abbott's let him down. So what's he do instead of blaming Tony Abbott for the downfall, he'll go and blame Peta Credlin. And you know what? That's just low. That's a low attack on Peta Credlin. It shouldn't have been done. Murdoch, you got it wrong. You backed the wrong man, and now he's going down. So you know what? Suck it up, mate.
Larissa Waters.
But I don't get the Australian tomorrow.
I
I reckon you will win this show tomorrow.
I just say to that, firstly, here. And secondly, I think it's really disappointing that we don't see more women in senior positions. We had one extra woman added to the cabinet, and apparently we're meant to be satisfied that there's now 2 women out of 19. Well, come on. We're in the 21st century now. We can do better than that. And certainly there are meritorious women in the coalition ranks, as there are across all spectrums in the parliament.
Do you think she's a target because she's a powerful woman?
I'm sure that's part of it, but I'd actually tend to Jacqui's point of view. Murdoch can't take down his own man, so he's picking the woman who stands behind him. I think, Abbott's the one that's got to go, not Credlin.
It doesn't get any lower in politics than when you're blaming your staff. And when it comes to the Coalition and News Limited, basically the Coalition's a wholly owned subsidiary of News Limited, and they decided they want to change the staff and the Prime Minister.
That is...
John Madigan.
But Wayne, you were going so well tonight until you make a comment like that, which is just so puerile and ridiculous.
And so true.
It's so puerile.
It's so true, and you know it.
Puerile.
Can I just say that John Madigan is quietly grimacing over there? I'd like to hear why.
Well, the first thing is Peter Credlin didn't go to the public to become run for Prime Minister or become a Member of Parliament. And personally, I think it's, quite cowardly to attack the members of MP staff in the public arena.
Is that because the buck's got to stop with the actual politician?
Well, that's right. We're the ones who are elected. We are the ones who are responsible. The second point is the last time I looked, Rupert Murdoch renounced his Australian citizenship to become an American citizen. Now,
he didn't renounce his Australian media ownership. That's right. The difference.
But the point here is that, he's entitled, Mr. Murdoch, as anybody is, to have an opinion. But in the Australian sphere, yes, he's one of the biggest media owners, and he's entitled to have his papers and interests. But the key point for me is he renounced his Australian citizenship. That's how much he thought of it.
OK, we've got time for one last question. It's one we've partly discussed tonight, but not completely. This question comes from Mark Salmon.
Thanks, Tony. This past week, members of the panel have criticised the Prime Minister for awarding Prince Philip an Australian knighthood. Given Prince Philip's service in World War II, over 62 years of service to the Commonwealth alongside the Queen, and he's establishing the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, which has helped hundreds of thousands of young Australians reach their potential. Do members of the panel think that Prince Philip is unworthy of an honour from Australia?
Barnaby, Joyce.
I think he's worthy of an honour from the British Parliament and from the English people. I think that the Australian Day Honours List on Australia Day, we should be concentrating on Australians. I know that this has happened in the past. We've had other people, very meritorious people, who Mother Teresa got an honorary award, but I think that Australia Day should be the realm of looking after Australians. I've expressed that view privately. I've expressed that view publicly. And I think it's...
Are you comfortable with the whole idea of knights and dames being brought back?
I think that yes, I am, because I think that a person who's done something exceptional for Australia should be recognised, and it should inspire the question: why is that person called Sir or Dame? And you say because they did all this research into cancer, or they did this work in our military and served our nation, or they did this work for charity. And that's why they're deserving of that title.
Okay,
it's
but
just like why people wear a
But just going back to the question, Tony Abbott today claimed this had been his captain's pick, or one of several captain's picks where he got it wrong. And so I'm just asking you, does that devalue the knighthood which has been bestowed upon Prince Philip? Well, I would have preferred it had gone to an Australian, but that is my assessment. And I think that everybody has got to give any person in their workplace the latitude that every now and then they're not infallible. They make mistakes. But there's nothing worse than somebody who makes a mistake in your workplace and you spend the rest of your life just hounding them about it. Okay, it was a mistake, you move on. That's how decent people work. I was going to go back to our question, and Mark, did you want to get involved in that?
If someone lives overseas and still does a lot of work for Australians, are they still deserving? And does this mean that people have picked a small thing to pick on the Prime Minister instead of focusing on other issues?
I think the second part is dead right. I mean, it got so much momentum, and you really thought, what is the actual result for our nation of this? If it was a mistake, it was a mistake. It's not going to be seminal in where this nation goes. And other people got it and thought...
It seemed quite symbolic. I think that's why even you object to it, because it seemed symbolic to actually create knights and dames and then bestow a knighthood on, well, the consort of the Queen.
Well, and as I said, mistakes are made, you move on.
But does it mean... the question, I suppose the question that's still lingering is whether it means the Prime Minister is or was out of touch.
Look, I'll tell you what, you find me one person in any position who at some point in time has not made a mistake. My gosh, I could fill a book up with mine. You know, that's...
You're not the PM.
Yeah, but the PM is still flesh and bones like the rest of us.
Yeah, but he makes a lot of mistakes. He can't afford to.
And I think that the overall, what I like about Tony is that, in a funny way, it's the mistakes that make him strong, because I see it's a human being, I see he's earnest, I see he's authentic. I don't find him a person scripted by what the media junkies and all the people in the back rooms want him to be. He is who he is, and that means I find him honest, and that means I can trust him.
Yes, but his downfall is he's not learning from his mistakes, Barnaby. That's the problem, that's the issue that we have. And on your knights and dames, it needs to be dead and buried, there's no doubt about that. And I'm actually surprised he didn't give his mate Murdoch one.
OK, let's hear from our other panellists. John Madigan.
Look, you know, would have I personally given an honour to, Prince Philip on Australia Day? No. But I'm just gobsmacked at how much time is being wasted on this. You know, we've got crises around the country in manufacturing, in farming, in the Murray-Darling Basin, you know, the family law court. There are so many issues in this country that concern people and are affecting lives. They're affecting individuals, their families, their extended families, their friends and their communities, and we're obsessed about a mistake made by the Prime Minister in awarding an honour to the Queen's consort. And that's what's consuming everybody's attention at the moment. But I can tell you what, if you go out into regional and rural Australia, if you go into the back streets of Melbourne or Victoria or Sydney or Newcastle or wherever, and you talk to the people who are losing their jobs, and you talk to the people that are concerned about our naval shipbuilding and the submarines, these are the issues that people are worried about. And, you know, when we talk about the subs, it absolutely bloody well astounds me that the rest of the world, our major competitors like Japan, Germany, these countries have been building submarines for over 100 years. And from ground zero, we built the Collins-class submarine. Submarines are the spaceships of the ocean. And a lot of the problems that we've had with the Collins-class submarines were from things that were imported from other countries. It wasn't the things that were made in Australia. But that's always overlooked in this continual debate. Why don't we talk about the things that matter? And one of the most important things is that people have a job, a sense of self-worth and gainful employment.
Well said. And Larissa Waters.
Look, Mark, thanks for the question, and I agree with John on the inordinate attention that it's gotten. The thing that most disappointed me was on the day when we recognised one of our domestic violence campaigners in this country, Rosie Buddy, who suffered just an unimaginable loss and who's done such strong and brave work since then to bring the issue of domestic and family violence into the public domain. That got thoroughly overshadowed by this bizarre harkening back to centuries gone past. And that really disappointed me because in this country we've got an epidemic of domestic violence. And sadly, under this government, we've seen cuts to the services that women need to try and get themselves and their children safe. So I agree with John in the terms of the real issues are being overshadowed by what was clearly a brain blip by the PM.
All right, Wayne Swan, we've got 30 seconds.
It wouldn't have went on if he'd said it was a mistake straight away. And what really worries people is they think he's making mistakes elsewhere and he's got the same attitude and he won't admit it. And that's what's eating away at his credibility.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Jacqui, Lambie, Barnaby, Joyce, Wayne Swan, Larissa and John Madigan. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to be back. And next Monday, we'll be joined by Australia's most influential broadcaster, Alan Jones, Infrastructure Minister Jamie Briggs, Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen, and the Chair of the Australian Super, Heather Ridout. Until next week's Q&A, good night.